Okay. Okay, let's pull up that memory verse I have here. That's the first slide up. And did anybody memorize it since last night? If you don't know, like I said, we had the party, well, not much of a party, a dinner for all of our children's and nursery workers. And I did, during the game time, kind of spring it on them to see if anybody had memorized it. Anybody memorized it yet? Half. Good. We'll take it. We'll take it, Betty. And I know, yes, my mother-in-law did, and we were all working out in the car this morning, so because they were afraid I was probably going to call them up and make somebody say it. But what we'll do is we'll just read it together right here, right off the screen. Can we do that? Follow me. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And he was called a friend of God. Yep, that's the series we're in, the friend of God. The second, it's like a hockey game. There's 3 halves, right? So anyway, no, it's the second portion of our study in the book of Genesis, the friend of God. Please take out your Bibles as we continue into that. And if you have one of these Bible journals, if you didn't get a chance to get one, we do have some over here on the table yet. But if you have that, open it up right up to the book of Genesis, chapter 13. We're going to read verses 5 through 8, and that's on page 54 if you're using one of these journals. Page 54, Genesis 13, verses 5 through 18. Please stand with me in respect to God's word. This is what it says. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's flock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abram said to Lot, Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley, and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Then the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. You may be seated. Last week we saw Abram at the beginning of his journey to the pinnacle point in his life. Remember, we talked about how the Dead Sea area where he is the lowest point on the surface of the earth, and he is moving upward to the hill where we now know that he would eventually offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice to the Lord, and that is the pinnacle of his life, and we are watching his journey from this low beginning up to that high point that he will achieve. And we saw last week, as he started his journey, that the beginning of his journey may have been one of the worst points in his life. It may not be the worst point, but it probably is one of those worst points. And there will be others, and we're not going to sit here and try and decide which one is the worst and which one might be worse. We're not going to try and rank them, but we see him here today at one of his best points. This is one of these times when Abram gets to shine and gets to do right. Where we see him today, it's one of the best. there is a principle in there for us in seeing this. There are times when we see Abram and he's doing very badly. There's times when he's doing very well, and he's going to go like this in his life, and we all do that, don't we? We have good days, and we have days when we do very well, and we have days where we do very badly. But what happens is as we go on these up and downs, what we hope to see is a trend of constantly going upward. We will fall. We will make mistakes. We saw Abram do that last week, and he did it so badly. But we pick ourselves up, and we move on. And as we go on this journey to try and become more and more like Christ, hopefully our trend is going upward. It's something we have to self-evaluate all the time. I look at my life, and yes, I fell today, but where am I? Am I moving upward in my trend? Is my general trend going like this, or am I just going flat, or am I going down? And we have to constantly look at our lives and see that we're doing that, because if we don't, we're just going to drift. And if you're drifting, which way are you going? We're always down. Always down. Any dead trout can float downstream, right? But if we want to be pressing on toward that upward goal of the call of Christ, we have to be swimming against the current often. And hopefully as we do, we will see that our trend moves upward. We see in the life of Abram that his trend definitely moves upward. As Abram begins to progress on his journey, what we see here is God blessing him. This is where we left off last week after he had that really rough time in Egypt. Even at the end of it, we saw that God was blessing him. Looking back at last week's passage in chapter 12, verse 18, we see this. It says, "And for her sake, that Sarai, Pharaoh, he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep and oxen and male donkeys and male servants and female donkeys and camels." He actually came out of that whole experience blessed of God. It seems odd to me, but he did get to keep those things even after he got busted for lying to Pharaoh. Doesn't that seem strange to you? I think Pharaoh was just in such a hurry to get him out of his country. Just take it and go. I just don't want to see you again. We open up here in chapter 13, verses 5 and 6, and it says, "And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together." God was just blessing these two men and their families. Abram and Lot were getting blessed so much that they were running out of room. It's kind of like in the Old West. They had their herds here, and you'd see this thing, and this farmer, this rancher, he's got his herds, and this rancher's got his herds, and they all want to let their herds out to graze, and there's not enough grass to go around, and that's the situation these guys found themselves in. And so their herdsmen, their cowboys, if you want, were fighting with each other over whose livestock could graze in which field. But they were so blessed of God that the land could not contain them. So let me ask you this. Reading this story, how did Lot and Abram handle this blessing? They were blessed so much the land could not contain them, and what happened? They split up. And why? Because they started to fight. They were so blessed, they were growing and prospering in such a state, and their response is sadly to begin to fight about it. In verse 7 it says, "And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock." They started to fight about the blessings of God. Does that sound right to you? Does that make sense to you? Is that how we should respond when we're blessed by God? Don't you just love it when you try to do something really special for your children and they start bickering and fighting over it? Have you ever had that happen? How many have had that happen? Huh? Maybe some Christmas you got them a new gaming system like the newest Nintendo. Is Nintendo even still a thing? Is it? Okay. I know the old ones are still around because those are going for big bucks. Everybody still wants the old ones. But, you get your kids a new gaming system and you give it to them Christmas morning and they're so excited to see them play it. And what do? They start fighting over it with each other. My turn, I want to play. You cheated, all this kind of stuff going on. There was a time Lisa and I got our kids a new gaming system. Long, long ago, this will date it so you know, it was a Sega gaming system, and it came with Sonic the Hedgehog 2. This one was Sega. We need your help, guys. Which one came with Sonic the Hedgehog 2? Sega, thank you. Every now and then, I get to be right. And this time, everyone got to see it, and it's even being recorded. I'm going to save this video forever. I won't, but I'm going to play it often. Yes, we got them a new Sega, and it came with Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Now, we wanted to be sure it was safe for the kids and everything. It was about a month before Christmas when we picked it up, so we got it out one night after we put them to bed, and we tried out the game, and we played it for quite a while. And so the next night, we also had to make sure it was safe, so we got it out, and we played it again, and we did that I think it was the last gift wrapped up on Christmas Eve, because we had to try it out one more time before we gave it to the kids and never saw it again. That was fun. That Sega was. But imagine how you would feel and how it would have gone if you had scrimped and saved and bought your kids something super special like that, and all they did was fight over it once you gave it to them. Well, we're going to take it back. We're going to put it in Mom and Dad's room. How would you feel? Well, how do we think our Father feels when He blesses us with something and then we fight and bicker over it? That probably never happens, does it? No. It happens far too often in churches especially. It really does. This is a confession of us as the church. And you look at the things we fight over. A church is blessed and growing, so we fight over the color of the new carpet, right? We fight over the style of music we're going to have. We bicker over the kind of seats we're going to have. When God has lavished on us a warm, safe, comfortable place to sit under His word and worship Him. We are so blessed here in this building, aren't we? It's warm in here. He gave us a new boiler this year, and He takes care of us this way, and we get to sit here, and we get to enjoy His word and His presence and each other's company and worship Him. And too many times in too many churches, people bicker over those little things. And I do want to interject here that I am not talking about this particular group of people, and I'm not being sarcastic. I do want you to hear me that in this church, I am so proud of the way you guys get along. It's been a year and a half. We've gone through a lot of changes. We've done a lot of things, and I haven't seen any bickering. I haven't seen any complaining, and I'm blown away. I love other people ask me, how's the church going? One of the things I can always share with them is your unity and the way you work together. I'm so proud of you for that. But these things that I listed, those are like the number one things churches get in fights and bickering over. I've seen it otherwise. Let me share a little story with you from my past. It happened in one of the churches I pastored a long time ago, and I do name these stories at times, and so I can share them, and it helps us remember them. I believe I told you about Chainsaw Sunday before. It'll come up again because, we recycle our stories, but I want to share with you one called the Lawn Chair Rebellion. Our church was growing, it was being blessed, and we were moving up, and we had to start finding ways of making more room in our sanctuary. We're getting to that point where you're looking at going from, do we add a second service? Do we go to 2 services? What do we do at that point? And I can tell you, those are not easy decisions, are they, Gary? And people feel divided and stuff like that. So I had read some books or something, and we saw, well, if you change your seating in the sanctuary this way, it'd probably help your people stay connected. So I, being a young pastor, thought, why not? Let's try it. Yeah. Sounded simple, but there was a group of people in the church who didn't like that idea at all. They walked in and saw all the seating moved around in the sanctuary, and they were just livid. The next week, they came back, and they brought their lawn chairs with them, and they sat them right where they always had them. For weeks, several weeks, they sat there in their lawn chairs, and they would not move into where we had put the chairs.
Not a joke.
Not a joke. We laugh now, and like I said, thank you for sparing us all these kinds of things, but we have seen them. We have been there. And it's so sad they sat there in their lawn chairs until they eventually left over the arrangement of the chairs. Now, granted, it may have been a dumb idea, but I was young and I've done plenty of dumb things in ministry, and I wish they would have just looked, well, there he goes again. They always do that with the youth pastor. You ever notice that? The youth pastor can burn down the church and say, well, that's the way he is. Oh, yuck, yuck, yuck. Pastor moves a few chairs around, and it's the apocalypse. Yeah. And you think about it, what point of major theology was at risk in that experience? Because the chairs were seated a little bit different. Like I said, it might have been kind of a dumb idea. There's a ton of books. There's a ton of things to try. Maybe they would have rather had, instead of having to say, well, we got this young pastor, and he's reading these books, and he's trying these things, maybe they would have rather had a pastor that never read anything and never tried anything. I don't know. We, in our part of the church, we Baptists, it's kind of like sometimes our favorite hymn is We Shall Not Be Moved, We struggle with this, and I don't know why. It's like you've probably heard this story about the man who was marooned on a desert island, and he was there all by himself for years and years and years, and finally a ship came along, and they saw him, and they came to rescue him, and there were 3 huts on there, on the island there, and the rescuers came in, and it was a Sunday morning, and he was sitting in one of the huts. He had a cross up on top of it, and each one of the huts had a cross up on top of it, and they came in, and they said, well, we're glad we found you. What are you doing in here? He goes, well, this is where I go to church. Every Sunday I go here. And he's on this island all alone. And they said, well, then what are these other 2 huts? And he said, well, those are where I used to go to church. Think about it a minute. It's just too bad that we bicker and squabble as the church, capital C, like we often do, especially in times of blessing. It is often not in the times of when the church is down and out and struggling that it is having these kind of fights. It's when things are going well and we're blessed and we're expanding or we're doing something like that. And then we start bickering and fighting. Like I said, I'm so glad I get to share with other pastors how your church, my people are so unified. I am so proud of them. It's not like that everywhere. Let me ask you this. Isn't what really matters when we look at times like that we spend time in the Word together and worshiping and prayer and fellowship and reaching out to the world as a people together, and this is the place we do it? Isn't that what really matters? Anytime, the warning is this, anytime we get bent out of shape over anything other than those things I just mentioned, especially if it's not a doctrinal thing, we are getting off track and we are getting into the flesh. That's when we start bickering and fighting. Whether we are the person sitting in the congregation or the pastor of the church itself, I can be guilty of it myself. I can sink my heels in and demand, I will have my way. And then I'm part of the problem. Whenever there is bickering and fighting in the church or the home or the job, because you see it at all those places, don't you? Anybody have a family that's never had an argument or bickering and fighting over something? You know, one of the saddest things I see is often after a funeral, how many families that have lived together for so many years, and once they start talking about the estate and all that, it like all goes out the window, and they all start fighting and hating each other, and they never speak to each other again, and it's like, you just lost a loved one. Why are you worried about the couch and who gets it? But I've seen it. You see it at work. too. So the truth is that whenever there is bickering and fighting, the truth is that we are only concerned about ourselves and what we want. That's what it says. We might as well get it printed on t-shirts because it's the truth. Well, God had blessed Abram, and in so doing, Lot got blessed too because of Abram, and now their workers were bickering and fighting with each other over this very type of thing. Look with me at the book of James, chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. It'll be up on the screen if you're just staying in your journal. James chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. As I've been preparing this study, I'm surprised how many times that there's a correlation between the book of James and the life of Abram, but these things we're seeing are all kind of spelled out there. And in James chapter 4, verses 1 through 3, James starts out with this question: what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? So obviously, this is not a new thing, is it? James is the first book in the New Testament written, many people believe. It's at least one of the first, and already he is dealing with this issue. What causes quarrels and fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. I want what I want, so we fight. Right? Well, interestingly, that verse is in the very same context of a verse, the exact same context of verse 4. If you were to look down one more verse, I gave you that very verse 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the world. James 4:4 says, you adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is what? Do you remember it? Enmity with God. Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world makes himself an enemy of God. I don't think James even picked up his pen when he was writing that. He's writing about the bickering and the squabbling and the fighting and the desire to have for myself. And he writes right through all that and goes right on into, you adulterous people, don't you know that you can't be a friend of the world and a friend of God? No pause. No stop. If you are having problems with bickering and fighting, you are behaving more like the world and less like a friend of God. That's what he's saying. The world and nature, for that part, just our own human nature, it says to us, take what you can get, consume as much as you want. The other guy can take care of himself. It's all through nature. It's like two dogs fighting over a bag of food. There was a time when we had two of our... When you're parents, don't you always have some of your kids' pets living with you for some reason? And we had two dogs, two big dogs. One was a Belgian Malinois, and I love both dogs. And, you know, it's this big, and it's the kind of dog they use in the army to... It's the kind of dog that caught Saddam down in his little spider hole. The military uses those. And the other one was this hulky boxer named Tank. That should tell you enough. And Lisa had gone to the grocery store, and I came out, and I was helping unload, and the dogs were in the house, and I brought in this big old bag of dog food, and I sat it down. I went outside to get the rest of the food, and I heard Lisa's, our food. Theirs was in there now, getting our food. I just sat it down, went to help unload the groceries, and I heard Lisa screaming like I have never heard her before or since. And the reason was those two big dogs were actually trying to kill each other over that bag of food. There was food in the dish, but they saw that bag. And each dog had determined, that's mine, and you can't have it. And I'm glad I got there before she jumped in and tried to do something. It was my hand that got eaten up by the dogs. I got to stop doing that. That was the right hand. The other hand was the left hand. But, you know, those dogs, they tore my hand up as I was getting them apart. They were going to kill each other over a bag of dry dog food when there was food in the dish. That's nature. Aside from God, that's our nature. Well, this was Abram's chance to shine. Look at verses 8 and 9. We're back in Genesis chapter 13 again. Look at verses 8 and 9 with me. It says, "Then Abram said to Lot, 'Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen.'" What are we doing here? "Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take if you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." Abram demonstrated that he cared more about their relationship, he and Lot, than he did about his own rights and possessions. You see that there? God had given all this land. God had led Abram in there, and who did God give the land to as he took him in there? Abram. Not Abram and Lot. Lot was the tag-along nephew that Abram had taken under his wing after his father died, and he allowed him to travel with him and live with him, and he was raising him up probably like a son. It wasn't given to Lot, though. It was given to Abram. It would have been good enough if Abram had looked. It would have been still very generous if Abram had looked and said, "You know what, Lot, we're having problems. I'm going to give you that territory over there. We'll section this off. We'll get it all charted out so we know that that is yours, and that is my gift to you, Lot." And that would have been so generous. And if you were Lot, you should have just said, exactly. But Abram, he does this. He tells Lot, "I care about you so much. What I want you to do is I'm going to put this all out before you, and you look over all this land God has given me, and you pick what you want, and it's yours. And I will go somewhere else." There is this immense sense of maturity in Abram and what he did there. And we can see, because of that, the character of God beginning to shine through him in him as he's on his journey. It was very mature in him. In what he said to Lot, he was appealing to Lot's sense of maturity. Let's be adults about this, but I'm going to give you the freedom to do that, right? It's your choice. You can choose, and I'm hoping you're going to be an adult about this. That's pretty much what the Hebrew says for us in there. The English translators miss a little bit of something there. Pretty much every English translation missed it here. There's a little bit of a subtlety. Most translations say, "For we are relatives." I believe that's what the ESV says that you're reading there. Some of them say we are brothers, pointing out the family that they're, and when he says we're brothers, he's really making Lot what? A peer. Because brothers are equal. And he's bringing him up to this status of peership. We're peers. We're family. But the Hebrew actually contains something a little bit more. The Hebrew actually says we are men. And then, when you go put that space, dash, space, and you put the other word, I think it's called an M dash, right? That's when you want to emphasize. There's a little pause there, and that's the way it should be. Because in the Hebrew, what it says, we are men, dash, brothers. Two things he points out, not just one. He doesn't just say we're kin or anything like that. We are men and we are brothers. Two separate titles. Like I said, he's already exalted him to the status of a peer by calling him a brother, but he is appealing to his maturity as a man and a peer by saying, we are men, let's act like it. Let's not act like children, is what he is saying there. Paul says it this way to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians 14:20. And I'm going to say it from the King James because it rings so much like in Genesis here where we're studying. 1 Corinthians 14:20, it says, Paul wrote, "In malice be children, but in understanding be men. Be naive to the things of the world, but in your behavior, what? Be mature. Be men." The ESV says that same verse, "Be infants in evil, but in your thinking be mature." That is the whole context. So he is saying, let's handle this like two grown, adult, mature peers. We have to split up. We can't keep going this way, so you pick your area. Isn't that how God wants his children to be with each other? Jesus gave us the great example of that. He deferred to Lot. He gave preference to Lot and his needs in that, and he put his needs there first. Isn't that exactly what Jesus did? We studied over a year ago. We were in the book of Philippians, and you get to chapter 2, and it talks about how Jesus existed before time as God, and everything that was God was in him, and yet how he sat that aside, and he came down, and he lowered himself, setting aside everything he was and had as God, and he came down to this planet to walk with us and walk among us and die for us. He didn't have to, but he sat aside his own interests and he sat aside his own desires and his own passions because he loved us and he took that spot. He lowered himself even to the point of, it says, taking on the role of a servant and washing the disciples' feet, even the feet of whom? Judas. The night before he betrayed him. Sat aside his own desires and came to our aid. He deserved everything. He demanded nothing. That is the pattern. Paul had to deal with this kind of squabbling in the church in Corinth at one point. Turn with me over to 1 Corinthians 6, chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. You know, I saw a church one time. It was called Corinthian Baptist Church. And when I look and see all the troubles that the church in Corinth had, I always wonder, why would you call yourself that? Well, this is one of those problems right here. It seems like Paul is correcting them all the way through the book, 2 books worth. And there's even a third letter he wrote that we don't even have. And somebody named their church after him. Not me, not my choice. Anyway, 1 Corinthians 6, verses 1 through 8. This is what Paul tells his church there. When one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare to go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Do you not know that we are to judge the angels? How much more than matters pertaining to this life? So if you have such cases, why do you lay them before those who have no understanding in the church? I say this to your shame. Can it be that there is no one among you wise enough to settle a dispute between brothers? But brother goes to law against brother, and that before the unbelievers. To have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat to you. Why not rather suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud even your own brothers. He uses that term brothers in there, just like Abram did, probably about 4 or 5 times in that one verse. And something had happened in the Corinthian church, and it doesn't tell us what, and it doesn't really matter. We know they were squabbling. We know they were bickering. And they actually went to the point of taking each other to what? Court. Over disputes between people in the church. Christians, part of the church, together in Corinth, were taking each other to court in a heathen and pagan and licentious culture to get what was rightfully theirs. That's what they were doing, however you slice it. And you got to know this, when he talks about why are you taking it to these people, what, do you think you're going to get sound judgment from the world? You got to understand the city of Corinth was such a vile place that the rest of the world would say, if you were somebody who went to a prostitute, you were Corinthianizing. And those are the ones you're going out of the church and into that world for them to decide your issues. Paul's saying, what are you doing? Those are the people that you are going to in order to find justice, like they are going to know what is right and what is wrong? He says, do you not have some in your church, someone who understands the word of God, someone that the Holy Spirit dwells in, who can decide this for you, that you've got to go to court before the heathen? In fact, the Greek word in that verse actually starts out with the word dare. Dare anyone do this? How can you be so bold as the church of Jesus Christ to drag your dirty laundry out there for the world to see and for the unrighteous to make a judgment on your issue? We should be afraid to do that. That takes some nerve. I remember times when there were issues going on in the church, and I would beg people at times, we have new Christians here, don't take this out in front of them. They don't need to see the church acting this way. Let's deal with it. But don't take it out to the new believers, to the new people in the church, to anyone like that. And that's exactly what they were doing. That's why Paul says to them, if you're doing this, you've already lost the battle. You may win your little battle over this issue, but you're losing the war because you are not going to be able to reach the people that God has you in this city to reach because of the way you're bickering and fighting and you're doing it out in front of them. So what he says, and this is the really critical part, he says, so paraphrasing it, why don't you just take it on the chin and chalk one up for God? That's what he says to him there. He says, why not rather suffer wrong? Yes, what they're doing to you is wrong. Okay, take it. Isn't that hard? We don't want to do that, do we? That's not right. I shouldn't have to take, how many times have any of you said that? And you don't have to raise your hands, but I know, I shouldn't have to do that. Of course you shouldn't. And Paul's saying, but do it. Take it. He says, why not rather be defrauded? That's kind of, did anybody use the word defrauded anymore? And this is even a modern translation. It's kind of like you've been conned. Somebody promises you one thing and gives you something else. Kind of a bait and switch. Yep, they did that to you. So what does Paul say? What's he saying? Let it be. Let it be. Sounds a lot like Jesus to me in Matthew 5, verses 38 through 42. You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, right? That's equity, that's justice, that's getting what we each deserve. Every time I say getting what we each deserve, though, I have to think of this comic strip I used to have, and it's this husband and wife in line to go up to the judgment seat of God. And she says, I'm telling you, Harry, this time don't demand everything you've got coming. That's what I think of every time I see those, but that's justice, and we want what is due us. Jesus says, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, what does he say to do? You know it. Turn the other one. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If you want your shirt, give him your coat. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, what does he say? Go 2. This is actually pretty hard stuff. We gloss over this stuff when we read it because it goes against everything inside us. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you unless it's your son. No, just kidding. We're only talking tools there. No, he doesn't give us that exclusion, does he? Somebody needs something? Give it. Somebody demands something? Give it. Somebody forces you? Go. And when Paul talks about it, he's clearly talking about living within the church context. Somebody else in the church has deceived you or wronged you, and he says, as Betty did, let it be. Set it down, forgive it, and let it go. That is exactly how Abram dealt with this. He gave Lot free rein to choose whatever he wanted, and he trusted that God would take care of him with the rest. And that's where faith comes in, doesn't it? Isn't that trusting God at that point? I have allowed this person to wrong me, and it has hurt me. It has damaged me. How am I going to get along? Who's going to take care of me? Who's going to take care of me? God is going to take care of me. And I must trust him, and that is exactly what Abram did there. He preferred Lot over his own interests. He gave preference to Lot. Turn with me to Romans 12:10. This is just a quickie. There's a few verses here, a few words in this verse you might want to underline. Because Paul says, be devoted to one another in brotherly love. That is nice. That's when we do those things together that are fun. And we need to do those. That is part of being a church, part of being a Christian. And then he says, give preference to one another in honor. Give preference to one another. This summer, we're going to break from my usual thing of just teaching books. This is a little preview for you and going through a book study. And we're going to be looking at something more subjective, something to help us grow closer together. I love you. We're a wonderful church, and it's beautiful. And you know what? I think we can be the best we can possibly be. And we're going to be the best little church we can. And we're going to go through a series called One Another. And I'm going to be pulling out the verses in the Bible that tell us as a church, one another, love one another, bear with one another. And here he says what? Prefer one another. What does that mean, to prefer one another? Doesn't mean like I prefer to be with you and not with you. It means to put others, yes, first. To prefer, it also means to defer. I may be deferential towards you, and I'll let you have the best seat. I'll let you go through the door first. That is what he's telling us to do. It's two sides of the same coin. If we do that, you know what I think? I think the only kind of squabbling we'll have if we're all saying, no, I want what they need. I want what you want. I want you to have what you need, and so I'm going to defer to you in this. I'm going to give preference to you. The only kind of bickering we're going to have then is when you say, no, you take the last piece of cake. No, you take it. I want you to have it. And you're going to stand there arguing for 2 hours over which one of you is going to take the piece of cake. You're going to say, you go first, or no, I'm holding the door for you. If that's the stuff I see you bickering over, I'm going to be so happy. Giving preference to one another. Maybe that's why Jesus said, blessed are the meek, because they're never demanding what they have coming to them. That's probably a good definition of that. They can have it. It's like I said, Jesus, he deserved everything, and he demanded what? Nothing. But they are trusting God for the outcome, and that is why he says they will inherit the earth in the end. Granted, people may abuse it. Lot sure did. If we go back to Genesis chapter 13 there, verses 10 through 13, it says, and Lot lifted up his eyes, and he saw the Jordan Valley. It was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord. It looked just like where to him? Eden. Well, we'll get to that too. Save that, Barb. Yes, but it starts with an E. Yes, it says the garden of the Lord, like Eden. And then he says, as Barb did, like the land of what? Egypt, where they had just come from in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So apparently that whole area was beautiful at one point, which is also a lesson. The things we bicker and fight over are often things that will be gone in some time and no one will remember, because it's just a big dust bowl now. So Lot chose, here's the two key words, for himself. And then look at the next word. What is it? All the Jordan Valley. He took all the green and left Abram with all the brown. I'll just take that nice strip up the middle and that'll do. It's all green, it's lush, and to me it looks like the Garden of Eden. In fact, it looks a lot to me like Egypt. How sad is that he took it for himself and he took all the best for himself. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. No foreshadowing there at all, is there? Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. You know what that tells us? That tells us he already knew they were bad when he took that area. But he looked at it and he says, you know what? I really liked our time in Egypt. It's too bad we got kicked out. I wish I was back in Egypt. It was so nice there along the Nile and everything was green and lush. And look, now I can have all this. I can have it all for myself. I know these guys are wicked. I know they are terrible. But kind of like in our Sunday school lesson this morning, but they won't affect me. Right? I'm not going to participate in what they do. A lot of foreshadowing there. This passage rings very much like if we go back to the Garden of Eden, where Eve looked at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and she saw it and she liked what she saw. And now here, and even though the serpent was there with it, right? And here he is. He knows these wicked people are living in that area, but he saw it and he liked it, and he took it for himself. So Lot chose the area that reminded him of his time in Egypt. But that's a sad tale, and we'll come back to that another day. I think Abram must have looked back many times, though, with many regrets over their time in Egypt and just wished he had never gone down there. God forgives, but we still do get to live with some fallout, don't we? And I'm sure he wished he hadn't taken Lot there, and I'm sure he wished he hadn't taken Sarai there. He brought back servants, including one little girl named, anybody remember her name? Hagar. We'll see where that landed him. We'll see where this lands Lot. We can't be friends with the world and friends with God, even if it's for a little while. Abram allowed himself to be defrauded, though, getting back to where he was shining, which means to allow someone else to get the better of you, and God came and spoke to him again. It says, "And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever, and will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if anyone can number the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." It's like God put his arm around Abram sitting there and said, "Don't worry about it. I've got your back." He took all the good stuff, and I've got you, and it's going to be okay. My promise will stand true no matter what anyone does to you. Isn't that the truth with God? That same encouragement should be there to help us when someone else takes advantage of us as well. And we choose to give preference to them, and we let them, as Paul said, just allow yourself then to be cheated if that's the way they're going to be about it. God's promises have nothing to do with the actions of others and their impact on us. He is our source, and he will see us through, no matter what. So we just need to take a step back and let him show himself faithful. Let God, give God room in your life to be God. Abram must have been discouraged and disappointed in what his nephew did. That's probably why I believe he was probably sitting there grieving, and I think that's why God said, "Come on, get up, let's take a walk. And look at all this, and I'm giving you all of it." Abram's response to all this, I love his response. When he's coming back to the Lord, it is always good. It says, "So Abram moved his tent. He moved away from Lot, away from Sodom, away from all those things, and he settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord." How did Abram end this experience again? He built an altar. We see the only time he didn't build altars was in Egypt, when he went back into the world. And now we can almost break up his life story by how many altars he built. God takes him this far, and he builds an altar, and there he worships God. God sees him through this, and he builds an altar, and he worships God who had seen him through this, knowing who his source was and what his source's promise was. That's what Abram did. There are not many ways I can think of to be more like Jesus and less like the world than to prefer one another and give deference to each other instead of ourselves and not demand our own way. Nothing gives God more room to be God in our lives than we stop striving and we stop clawing and we stop trying and we stop trying to hang on to everything for ourselves and just turn it over to him like that. Here it is, God, I can't fix it. I need your help. It's like David said in Psalm 46:10, "Be still and know that I am God." Some translations say, stop striving. Stop clutching. Stop bickering and argue. Just be still and know that I am God. Like I said, this is not an area of struggle I see going on in this congregation today, and I am so grateful. But it is something for us to remember. We see it in our work lives, we see it in our family lives, and especially if God were to continue blessing us as a church, we will go through times and there will be things we have to address and there will be changes and we might not like it, and how are we going to handle it? I want us always to be known as people who show the nature of God by giving preference and deference to one another. It was a shame for the Corinthian church to air their dirty laundry before a corrupt court of the world. Think of what a witness it is when God's children are living in peace, putting each other before themselves, and giving God room to be God in their lives. What a witness that is.